Hey guys, so today I wanted to take a minute and talk about what to do if you have weak knees, because I feel like I know almost every single person in the world has weak knees in some way, or they have kind of knee issues. So the four main areas, or the main problem issues that I see come up for people who are having knee issues, it's going to be one of four things. So a lot of times it's going to be underactive glutes, so your butt is not working as well as it should. Your hips are not coordinating as well as they need to. We spend a lot of time sitting, so it's pretty common for glutes to be really underactive and not coordinate well, because we just sit on them all day instead of actually working them. Even standing and walking around is going to engage them more than sitting on a chair where we're basically flattening them out all day. So working on your glutes can actually be really helpful. And at the end of this, I'm actually going to walk you through my 5 favorite exercises to really help with weak knees. So that's the one area where I see people having issues. Another one that I see a lot is having what I call a knee dominant movement pattern. And that's basically where you're just not coordinating your movements in an ideal way. And a lot of that can come from having a muscle imbalance. So when you have those underactive glutes, a lot of times what happens is your glutes get underactive, your hamstrings, the back of your thighs get really tight, and then the fronts of your thighs actually kind of get over strengthened compared to those other two muscles. So they get very dominant, which creates this knee dominant movement pattern. And I can actually demonstrate that for you. So on that, so imagine if you're gonna go do a squat or something, you might see people start like this. So the very first thing that moves is my knees. So you just squat like this, and a lot of people, their knees are gonna come forward, they're gonna come over past their toes, their torso is still staying super straight, heels come up off the mat, and that's a knee dominant movement pattern. That's basically where your knee joint is taking the entire brunt of that movement. Your knee joints are bearing all of your weight, and they're not designed to do that. Your knee joints are literally just designed to hinge forward and backward. They're not designed to actually bear your weight in that sense. So when your glutes actually start working properly, you would actually hinge at your hips first, and then your knees bend to allow that movement to happen to whatever degree you want. But see, even when I go all the way down, my knees are never going past my toes. So we're going to talk about that more when I actually walk you through how to do a few of these exercises. But so that's where you can see the underactive glutes and that knee dominant movement pattern can kind of all come together to create these knee issues. Another one that I see a lot is dysfunction at the joints, either above or below, or sometimes both, above or below the knees. So like I said, your knees are only designed to hinge forward and back to a certain degree. That's the only movement they're really supposed to be doing. And if the joints, so your hips or your ankles, if those are not working the way they are supposed to, that can force your knees to start taking on more of the brunt of the movements that you're trying to do to try to stabilize your body as you move. So if you have an issue with flat feet, if you roll your ankles a lot, that would be an ankle dysfunction. And that's where your ankles are not balancing you the way they need to, and so your knees are gonna kind of step in to try to help that out. And again, hip dysfunction, that could just be from the underactive glutes, or you could have some other stuff going on too. One that's really common, like I said before, we spend a lot of time sitting, and so that deactivates your glutes, but it also shortens your hip flexors. So you spend your time here in this position, you've got these muscles that span from like around here and somewhere in your core. You've got multiple muscles in here. So they all start somewhere in here, or maybe a little lower down, and then they come across your hip bones to attach either down here, and some even attach all the way down at your knees. So those are your hip flexors. And so if you are constantly, sitting here, my hip flexors are nice and long, right? If I am constantly in this position, I've just shortened those hip flexors. So now they're gonna get really tight without necessarily being strong. So that creates this dysfunction around your hips where your glutes are weak, your hip flexors are tight, and now your hips are not stabilizing as well as they need to. And that's going to affect your knees and even further down the chain at your ankles. So that's just some of the dysfunction that can happen there. And then, of course, number 4 is muscle imbalance. So I actually just described a muscle imbalance that is very common. Weak glutes that are kind of flattened and stretched out from sitting all day, and tight but also weak hip flexors that are shortened and tight from sitting all day. Another big one that I see if you have weak knees is going to be happening in here in your thighs. So a lot of times I'll see people when they start to squat. I use squats a lot to really identify movement dysfunction for people. So if you squat and your knees come in like this, that is a muscle imbalance. That's where muscles are not coordinating properly. Some are getting too tight, some are getting too loose, some are not engaging properly. So your knees really should be able to stay in alignment from hip to knee to ankle in a nice straight line, as opposed to caving in like this. You might also see some people with their knees bowing out when they squat. So those are both going to be types of movement dysfunctions that I see for people who are having knee issues. So how do you fix these? Ideally, I would say you really want to work with a physical therapist or a corrective exercise specialist, which is what I do, so that you can actually have someone look at how you're moving and tell you where you have this dysfunctional movement patterns, where you might have underactive or overactive muscles, and so they can actually give you the appropriate exercises for your body to start fixing that dysfunction. So some of my favorites, since not everyone is going to be able to get to see a physical therapist or see me, which if you do want to see me, just let me know. Comment on this or DM me. But some of my favorites to really help address these issues. I'm going to start actually standing with heel toe raises. So this is really addressing the ankle dysfunction piece. So if you have flat feet or if you've rolled your ankles a lot of times your feet aren't really used to doing their jobs. Or if you spend all your time in shoes, I definitely recommend doing this with bare feet so that your feet can actually start getting some work. Your feet are designed to be able to move a lot. That's why you have so many bones in your feet and so many muscles. Your feet are designed to absorb the force of your foot hitting the ground and your entire body weight pushing off. So start with your toes pointing straight forward. Really notice too, if your feet like to turn out, that actually is going to create a dysfunctional pattern further up the chain. You notice as soon as your feet turn out, your knees want to collapse in, your feet want to flatten. So your feet should be parallel to each other, toes pointing straight forward. You want to feel the tripod of your foot. So that means you can lift your toes up and really feel your big toe knuckle pressing into the ground, but also shift your weight a little side to side so you can feel that little toe knuckle pushing into the ground as well. And of course, your heel. That's your tripod. So once you're here, and you can always use like a chair or something to hold on to. I'm actually going to demonstrate with a chair. So we're actually going to be getting a little bit of movement back in your feet while strengthening your arches and your calves, because your calves all connect in behind your knee. So you really want all these muscles to be strong and capable of supporting you. So make sure those toes, your feet are parallel, and you can feel those toe mounds pushing into the ground. Stand up nice and straight. You don't want to hinge here. Don't perpetuate that muscle imbalance, right? So stay nice and straight, and you're going to press evenly through your toes just to lift your heels straight off the ground. Notice if your foot wants to roll in or out, and then really slowly, with as much control as you can, bring yourself back down. Then you're going to shift your weight back and pull your feet up off the ground so it's just your heels pushing down. You're trying to keep your toes pulling evenly up. Notice if your foot wants to pull out to the side or not, okay? And then you just repeat that, lifting and going really nice and slow, making sure that you're feeling all those little muscles working in your feet and giving them a chance to move with that proper movement pattern of forward and back only, as opposed to letting your ankles roll in and out. So that's the heel toe raise. The next one that a lot of physical therapists start you with is a isometric squeeze, an isometric contraction for your quads. Now, I like to kind of limit this one because it does help start building the strength to support your knees, but because, like I said, you get that muscle imbalance where your glutes are inactive, your hamstrings are tight, and your quads get stronger compared to those other muscles. So I don't like to work them too much, but this exercise can bring a lot of relief to that knee pain. So, which of course, if you're having pain, I can't fix your pain, so you definitely want to see a physical therapist on that. But this is a great one to start with, especially if you're really weak in your thighs. So all you do here, feet together, toes pointing straight up, really try to focus on your ankle alignment here as well. Make sure those kneecaps are pointing straight up, your legs aren't rotating out or collapsing in. So you're working on your alignment here, right? And then you're actually going to push those knees into the mat so you get this nice squeeze right here. So for me, my heels will actually come up off the floor because my knees like to hyperextend a bit. But you'll feel this nice contraction here in these quads. You would hold this for a count of maybe 5 to 10. Always err on the shorter side when you're first starting. And then release. You can, let them really relax. And then you would just do it again for probably 10 reps or so, or whatever you can do without creating a cramp, without getting super fatigued, and while maintaining perfect alignment. So this is a great practice one for getting good alignment. Then the next one I like to do really addresses the hip and glute issue while working on proper movement patterns. So I like to use a band on this one, especially if the problem is your knees collapsing in when you do a squat. If your knees bow out, don't use a band on this one. But more often than not, especially for women, your knees collapse in because of the angle of your hips. So get your band around the upper parts of your knees, and you're gonna lay down on your mat. So the first thing you wanna check is that you can feel both sides of your hips pressing evenly into the mat and both shoulders pressing evenly into the mat. And then you just want to lengthen out your spine. Imagine that there's like a little thread pulling your spine nice and long. Your top of your head is lengthening to the wall behind you, and your tailbone's lengthening to the wall in front of you. So you want your feet, especially if you're using the band, you want your feet about hip width apart. So you have a nice straight line from ankles to hips, and your knees should of course be in line with them, not collapsing in. The band is a great reminder for you to keep those knees pulled apart, and this band is actually going to force those outer hip muscles to start working more as you do your bridge. So once you're here, I always like to set with an active exhale so you can feel the muscles in your core activating. So say ha, and you're gonna feel a little squeeze in here. You'll feel those ribs pull down. So you want to keep your core right there. And then let your feet try to sink into the ground. Imagine they're getting really heavy. And as a result, your hips start to just float up just as high as you can comfortably go while keeping those ribs pulled down. So you're not really aiming to get like a perfectly straight line from shoulder to knees. You're really just aiming to keep those knees in alignment. You might start to feel a little squeeze in those outer hips, and you should feel a squeeze in those glutes. If you're feeling it more in your hamstrings, you want to actually drop your hips down just a smidge and make sure that those ribs are pulled down. So you'll hold this one actually for about 10 seconds, and then you can slowly release. Make sure as you do these, you really want to watch as you rise up and then as you lower back down, and notice how much wiggling is wanting to happen around your hips and your knees. So you want to go slowly enough that you can lift those hips up without wobbling too much, which of course, the more you do this, the stronger you'll get, the less you'll wobble. And then you hold, of course, for about 10 seconds or a count of 10. And then as you lower, Notice if one hip wants to drop faster than the other, and then aim to make it as smooth as you can. No knee wobbling and no hip wobbling. So that's the band bridge. Now, of course, if you don't have a band, you can do this without a band, still focusing on all those same things. So the next one that I like to do is a unilateral wall sit, which is far easier than it sounds with its name. Okay, so the unilateral wall sit, you're gonna need a wall, and you're sitting against that wall. What you wanna do is lower yourself down so that your hips are not a whole lot higher than your knees. Now, if you're weaker in these muscles, it's okay if you are up a little bit higher, whatever you need to do here. But I like to get as low as you can while making sure your heels are pushing into the ground. This is a common one where people want to pull their heels up. So heels pushed into the ground, feet together on this one. Otherwise, it's way harder than it needs to be. So press those hips, the low back, and your shoulders and your head against the wall so you have really good alignment up through your core. From here, do that little ha, that active exhale, so your core is working and supporting you. And then you're just gonna peel one leg up off the ground, pause and hold for a sec, come back down, and then switch sides. You're gonna notice one side is way harder than the other. And you might need to take it really slowly to make sure that you have very good control over this motion. But you don't want your shoulders shifting side to side. Always push straight back and press through your heels. That's actually gonna get those glutes activating really nicely as you do this exercise. So just do these wall sits, and you can aim to do like 10 to 20 on each side, but go with what you're able to do when you first start. So I love those wall sits because they are actually helping you hold in a squat position that's proper alignment while training those posterior muscles to really engage properly, but you're actually doing a complete chain movement where everything is working from your legs all the way up through your core. So this is a great exercise to really help you start strengthening plus retraining those movement patterns. Finally, we're gonna do a single leg deadlift, which I love this one because it's another one that it basically addresses all four of those main issues that happen with weak knees. And it really helps work those glutes. It challenges your balance. So if you have any ankle or hip dysfunction, it can help correct that. And it's gonna help just strengthen everything and get everything coordinating properly. So stand up for this one. And again, all of these, if you can do them with bare feet, that's better. So you're going to start on one foot, hips point forward. And this is a good one because it's gonna get you hinging properly at your hips instead of doing that knee dominant pattern. So you wanna start by just balancing on one foot. And then when you're ready, which again, you can do a chair. Here we go. You can use a chair. So find your balance. You want the chair about arm's length away from you. You're gonna find your balance, and then you can extend your leg out. You'll notice there's very little bend happening in my knee, just enough bend to allow me to actually lean forward. So ideally, you want to get to where your head and your back leg are about parallel with the ground, but you know, you might start up here when you first are getting started. As long as you're getting this beautiful hip hinge, your knee is still basically over your ankle, and you're feeling a nice squeeze in your glutes. You also want to make sure that your hips are not rotating open. You're really trying to keep both hips level above the ground. So there's that. And then make sure you can use this to balance, because coming back up is actually the most important part. That's where your glutes really work. So feel a bit of a squeeze at the top, and then you can repeat that, or you could alternate sides too, depending on how challenging this one is for you. Always make sure you check your ankle too. So your foot is pointing forward, your arch is hopefully working for you, and then you can hinge again. It's also common for one side to be weaker or one hamstring to be tighter than the other. So just work with the range of motion that you have, and you can always kind of decrease the range of motion on the side that has more so that you can be a little balanced as you do these. So that's everything I've got for you today on what can cause weak knees, kind of the problems surrounding it, plus my favorite exercises on how to fix it. So if you're having this issue though, like I said, I definitely recommend getting at least a movement assessment from me, or better yet, if you're having a lot of pain, always seek out a physical therapist who is knowledgeable. So good luck, and let me know how these help you.